Roman battles weren't just about fighting. They were a strategy for solving problems with force. When you look from afar, it seemed organized, but up close, it was chaos. Men, covered in dirt and blood, packed together behind large shields, shouted orders and prepared for a fight. This was more than just war. It was a well-oiled machine designed to crush anything that was slow, weak, or unlucky. Each Roman legion consisted of about 5,000 soldiers, split into smaller groups called centuries. These centuries were led by centurions, men who were far tougher than their title suggested. These centurions acted as battlefield leaders, ensuring every soldier was in line and every command was followed. When these soldiers advanced, they moved as one, a wall of metal that pushed forward without hesitation. If one soldier lost rhythm, they were quickly shoved forward to stay in sync. The front lines were made up of younger soldiers, still hopeful and eager to return home. Behind them stood the veterans, battle-hardened and scarred. The triarii, the oldest and most experienced soldiers, waited at the back, ready to step in only when things went wrong. When the triarii advanced, it signaled the breaking point of the battle. But Roman soldiers didn't rely just on their numbers. Before battles, engineers were sent ahead to level the ground, create maps, and build bridges. Their camps were built like fortresses, with trenches, walls, and watchtowers, all constructed overnight to prepare for whatever came next. Only once everything was in place would they begin their attack. The Romans didn't charge in without planning. They started with a pilum, a javelin designed not to kill, but to ruin the enemy's shields. Once the shields were useless, the Romans advanced slowly and methodically, forming a wall of shields and weapons. They didn't rush in screaming. They moved in disciplined lines ready to strike. Their primary weapon, the gladius, was a short sword made for stabbing quickly and efficiently, often under the ribs or into the stomach. Quick, precise, and deadly. The Romans were so tightly packed that swinging weapons was impossible. Instead, they drilled endlessly to perfect the basic movements. Their shields weren't just for defense. They were also used as offensive weapons. Soldiers would use their shields to bash enemies in the face, stunning them, while the next soldier would strike. This combination of shield and sword created a constant, unyielding force. The Roman tactics weren't just about the front line. Their formations could adapt. If the enemy tried to use cavalry to break the Roman lines, the Romans had spears ready to take down the horses. Their famous testudo formation was like an ancient tank. Soldiers locked their shields on all sides, even above their heads, making it nearly impossible for arrows to penetrate. They could march right up to enemy walls, looking like a giant metal loaf of bread, ready to attack with hooks, picks, and ladders. Fighting wasn't just limited to open fields. In cities, the battles were even more brutal. Door-to-door fighting, hallways full of smoke, arrows flying from rooftops. The Romans brought everything they needed for these urban battles: rams for gates, siege towers, firepots, and more. And if nothing worked, they weren't shy about setting things on fire. Roman commanders were always overseeing the battlefield from higher ground, using flags, horns, and runners to keep everything under control. When victory was within reach, the cavalry was sent in to finish the job. Roman cavalry wasn't about honor or dueling. It was about cutting off the enemy's escape and ensuring they couldn't regroup. Once the enemy was running, the cavalry would circle around and stop any retreat. When the fighting ended, it wasn't time for celebration. The soldiers would gather the dead, count weapons, and prepare for whatever came next. Winning a battle didn't mean stopping. They had to dig trenches, set up camp, and stay vigilant. Even after a tough fight, the soldiers had to keep working. Those who didn't die in battle were often captured, enslaved, or forced into the arenas for more training. Rome didn't waste anything, not even the broken bodies of defeated enemies. And if you thought the battles were terrifying, just wait until you heard about the Roman tricks before the fighting even began. Roman warfare wasn't just about strength. It was full of clever tricks and traps. The Romans were masters of surprise, hiding behind hills, forests, or even underground. They would lure enemies into a chase, only to spring hidden soldiers from the sides, trapping their foes in a sudden ambush. They were also experts at digging traps, camouflage pits filled with spikes. The Romans would make sure the enemy had to cross open ground, and then watch as they fell into pits, often with deadly results. They even designed the pits and patterns to trap horses, creating a mess of confusion and injury. And if they weren't digging, they had other tricks up their sleeves, like caltrops, small, spiky objects scattered on the ground to injure anyone who stepped on them. The Romans didn't just rely on traps on the ground. They used fire, flaming arrows, flaming pots, flaming carts, to create chaos and destruction from a distance. Whatever they could use to burn, they found a way to launch it at their enemies. Roman soldiers were more than just fighters. They were part of a well-oiled machine, carefully planned and trained to strike with precision. Their strength wasn't just in their numbers, but in their tactics, their preparation, and their ability to outsmart the enemy at every turn. Imagine you're in a city, looking up at the sky, only to realize that the forecast for today is a rain of oil and death. Roman siege tactics were designed to make sure that hiding behind city walls didn't guarantee safety. In fact, it was just the beginning of the battle. The Romans didn't just knock on gates and ask for entry. They brought everything they needed to tear those gates down: battering rams, catapults, siege towers, and fire. If none of that worked, they had patience. They could starve a city into submission. The Romans would build a wall around the city, known as a circumvallation, preventing anyone from escaping and cutting off supplies. Any attempt to sneak food into the city would often result in the person becoming a warning to everyone else. Meanwhile, Roman engineers worked tirelessly, digging tunnels to undermine walls or building giant ramps to roll battering rams toward them. They had towering wooden siege towers full of soldiers ready to climb over and into the enemy's defenses. And if the defenders held out for weeks or months, the Romans got more creative. One famous tactic involved burning pigs. Yes, they covered pigs in pitch, set them on fire, and sent them towards enemy elephants. The combination of noise, fire, and chaos often spooked the elephants into turning around and trampling their own forces. Flaming pigs. Just another example of Roman ingenuity. Roman soldiers also used fear as a weapon. Some painted their faces, wore animal skins, or banged their shields to sound like monsters. It was all about messing with the enemy's nerves. If a Roman could make the enemy hesitate for even a moment, it brought them closer to victory. When cities finally fell, the Romans made sure others knew about it. They would display the heads of the defeated on spikes, hang enemy banners on the gates, and sometimes even burn entire cities as a warning. The message was clear: resist, and this is what awaits you. Even when not in battle, Roman military leaders used trickery. They forged enemy messages, bribed local tribes, and sent spies disguised as merchants. The Romans didn't care about how they won. They just cared about winning. They would even use the weather to their advantage, attacking on foggy mornings or in the middle of the night. When others refused to fight in the rain, the Romans embraced it. And when the Romans staged a retreat, it wasn't because they were losing. It was part of the plan. They would let the enemy think they were winning, only to spring a trap when the enemy rushed in, making the victory turn into a nightmare for the attackers. But even the best-laid plans didn't always work. Sometimes the weather would change unexpectedly. Horses would slip, or scouts would fail. One small mistake could cause the whole formation to collapse. It didn't need to be a huge error. Just one wrong move, and an entire army could fall apart. Forests and tight spaces could turn a perfect formation into chaos. And even the mighty elephant, once a symbol of Roman strength, could become a danger, crushing soldiers underfoot. And not even Roman fire tricks were foolproof. Once, a gust of wind blew flaming tar back into the Roman ranks, setting their own siege ramps on fire. The soldiers jumped into moats to escape, only to find that those same moats were filled with other soldiers doing the exact same thing, creating a scene of utter confusion. When things went wrong, when legions were broken and commanders were lost, the Romans didn't retreat. They regrouped. Soldiers scattered, supplies were left behind, and enemy tribes chased them across rivers, laughing all the way. But Rome wasn't a superpower because of its size or strength. It was because of its resilience. Even after a loss, the Romans would send in another legion, then another, until they eventually came back with a new plan to crush their enemies. What made Rome dangerous wasn't just its army. It was the obsession with learning from failure. Every defeat was a lesson. Every mistake was studied. And by the fifth time they made the same error, they came back stronger and smarter, ready to take revenge. Once the dust settled, after the last enemy had fallen, the Roman soldiers would clean the battlefield. They didn't just go home and rest. They gathered the wounded, stripped the dead, and counted every coin and weapon. The battlefield was treated like a second job. No one left anything behind. Roman soldiers didn't earn medals. They got scars, dirt, and sometimes loot. The job was simple. Fight and maybe survive. Don't fight and you definitely wouldn't. Roman warfare wasn't about honor or glory. It was a machine built for control. It didn't matter if people liked Rome or remembered the fallen. What mattered was obedience. And if anyone forgot who was in charge, they'd be reminded by a pile of heads on a gate. In Rome's world, the aftermath of battle was often more terrifying than the battle itself.